January 2020 is the largest ever sustained reduction in health spending since 1951. The government's claiming that they've provided 10 billion to the NHS. It's not true. It's something like 4.5 billion, and that's not enough for rising health needs.
Well, very warm welcome. It's great to see so many of you here again. You may have seen and witnessed a pretty extraordinary event in recent history in Leamington Spa when we had Jeremy Corbyn come to speak to us. Apparently, we had more people there than Trump did for his inauguration. But that's my view on it, okay? So we're just trying to validate the numbers, but I think we're probably safe on that one.
A junior doctor wanted to come, but he couldn't. So this is what he emailed me. Best of luck with the event, and thank you for all the work you're doing for the NHS. I'm afraid I won't be an NHS doctor for much longer. Unfortunately, it seems we have reached breaking point in our hospitals, to the point of danger to our patients. Thank you again for all your hard work. With some luck and enough courage, maybe the NHS can rise from the ashes.
I'm a GP in London, but I grew up in Leamington Spa, so it's always good to be back. When I wrote the book, How to Dismantle the NHS in 10 Easy Steps, as Anna said, not the blueprints. Unfortunately, they've had them for a long time. The aim was to try and communicate to the public what the government and the media wasn't telling them, that the NHS is being sold off.
Firstly, in my department, I saw the recruitment of more less qualified, therefore less expensive staff. So I was questioning the cost, and it was only later that I realised that these less qualified staff had actually been brought in to justify downgrading us and making us compete with them to keep our jobs. In my department alone, 2 of my colleagues, who are highly trained, qualified physiotherapists and physiologists, were forced to drop from band 6 to band 5. The reason they were given was to bring them in line with the newest member of staff, who is now doing the same job, without the knowledge and the essential qualifications.
Now, we fought with the junior doctors last year. We had a fantastic turnout from them, and they really welcomed our support. But also, so did the senior consultants at the hospital, because they recognised what was going on. What is so typical of this government is this whole divide and rule attitude. And what they sought to do was break the BMA through the junior doctors, and then they would get to the senior consultants. And we're beginning to see that in every sector.
Really, the headline of my message is that the NHS has been abolished in legal terms, which sounds very shocking, because on the surface you still go to your GP, you still go to A&E or hospital, and things appear to be the same, but underneath everything is being transformed.
Presiding over endless grievance procedures brought about by unhappy staff who had in effect been bullied and eventually left because the effect of stress had on their mental health. They'd now been told that they were only going to have 15 minutes for a patient. This meant they only had time to make a diagnosis. They then had to send the patient away, who had to come back for another appointment to get any treatment. So that was 2 times the appointments. But of course, on paper, it looked good. Twice as many face-to-face contacts.
Yes, well, the government's saying that the NHS is broken, it needs fixing, but it needs the private sector to come in. And we all know that's not true.
The UK's PFI debt for all public services is now over £300 billion. And that's for projects that would have cost about £55 billion if they'd been publicly financed. In the case of 3 NHS hospitals, they are now owned outright by HSBC. So that's the kind of thing that we're not being told about.
All these changes were being made in the name of efficiency savings, and yet the services were now nowhere near as efficient or cost-effective as it had been 5 years earlier.
We have the legislation, it's called the Nhs Reinstatement Bill. It's even been in front of Parliament, and that would aim to repeal the Health and Social Care Act, the Privatisation Act. It would aim to remove the market and the private sector from the NHS. On the other hand, Jeremy Corbyn, John McDonnell were 2 of the earliest signatories to the Nhs Reinstatement Bill. They've made it official Labour policy.
NHS! Who's NHS? Who's NHS?
But today we're discussing 2 things that are close to all our hearts.
and that's education in the NHS system.
What would you cut? The TA who helped the child with autism cope with transition throughout their primary school years, the learning support mentor who's worked with a wide range of pupils to ensure that all achieve their potential, or would you cut both? What would you cut? The school counsellor, the qualified teacher? Would you cut both? The reality is that those examples that I've given are things that heads in Warwick and Leamington have had to face over the last few months. They're not just examples that I've plucked out of thin air, they're things that are happening at the moment.
There will be locally a loss of 11 teachers, potentially at Aylesford, a loss of 22 teachers at Myton and 25 at North Lem. These are large local schools and they will be affected.
Before the general election was called, the government had announced plans to introduce what they called a fairer funding formula. They quickly changed this when they realised that it wasn't actually fair, because how can it be fair when there's not enough money to go round in the first place? It's just not fair. So they called it instead the national funding formula. Says it all.
You're going to hear a lot of figures like this today. You're going to hear them bandied around, but they do mean something more than just figures. They mean that there's change occurring and it's not all good. It's a change to our kids' future and we must stand up. You can get involved today and you can make a difference.
Again, it's not completely untrue. School funding is at an all-time high. However, the bit in brackets that they don't necessarily say is that school pupils are also at an all-time high. And teachers' pay rises, for God's sake, we're only getting 1% at the moment, and that's after a pay freeze of however many years. But the 1% that schools are giving to their teachers is not being funded from anywhere. So, yes, schools are getting more money than ever, but they're also having to pay out more than ever.
Hello, I'm George Towell, and I'm 12, and I'm in my first year at North Lem. I've been brought up with a healthy interest in politics, and I am concerned that with another Conservative government on June the 8th, we will be taken into turmoil for the local NHS hospitals and the local schools. I believe it is not the NHS's fault people are waiting for hours on end in A&E or on a waiting list for an operation for months. It's Jeremy Hunt and Theresa May's, and the people who vote for them.
You know, when you look at the amount of money that schools have to save, you can't save that by turning out the lights or turning the heating down by a degree. You're only going to make those savings by fundamentally changing the nature of education. And when you see plans to introduce more grammar schools, or £10 million that was spent on opening a free school in Daventry that closed after 2 years with not one single child achieving a GCSE in English or maths, that's just one example, 10 million.
They were saying to me that their child, who's an 8-year-old lad, he cries before going to bed at night because he has been told that they're going to lose 6 teaching assistants from their school and 1 high-level teaching assistant. And he's so upset by it, he cries before he goes to bed. And that's the reality. I mean, it's actually impacting not just on you as parents, but also on the children. But we are going to face £267 million worth of cuts in Coventry and Warwickshire. That is massive. These are real things that are happening to every one of us. When I was talking to someone the other day in Bishop's Tatchbrook, she came to the door and she said to me, well, she looked first a bit slightly blank and like, what are you doing here? And she said, well, I'm not really normally Labour. She said, I am a senior cardio nurse. She said, for the first time in my entire career on Tuesday, I had to say no because they wanted me to do more hours, but I'm so exhausted, I cannot do any more.
And I felt so strongly about it that I felt I wanted to get involved and make a change, even if however small it is. If we stand together, I believe that we can do that.
In terms of positive things, you can all change this. As Matt has said, there is a choice in about 3 weeks, a very big choice. We actually have, in terms of what we can do to reinstate the NHS, to restore it as a public universal healthcare system.
Please join me and get active in saving the NHS. We need your help.
The government loves to talk about choice. It's everything. It's a market. Everything is a choice. June the 8th is a choice. June the 8th is a really big choice. I really hope that you can tell everyone, please get involved. Please do something in the next 3.5 weeks and really make your voices heard.
Thank you for listening to my speech, and remember, face the crisis, fight the cuts, and vote Labour.
And they would need all of us. We would need a national campaign, a mass movement. That's what changes history, and that's why it's so important that demos and events like this happen.
But I'm going to rely on some of the words of John Lennon's famous song, Imagine. I have slightly massacred it, sorry. Imagine there's no NHS and beds too. It's easy if you try. No A&E to help us, around us only strife. Imagine all the people living this way. Imagine there's no teachers, it isn't hard to do. Nothing for our kids' future, and no free schools too. Imagine all the people, our kids, living life this way. You may say I'm a scaremongerer, but I am not the only one. I hope today you'll join us, and something can be done. You may say I'm an alarmist, but I'm not the only one. I hope today you'll join us, and we can fight for our kids' future as one.